I'd like to start us off with a little experiment. Here's what we'll do. I'm going to show you the cover of my book. They say you can't tell a book by its cover, but I'm going to argue that in this case you can. So I'll show you the cover and then just make note of your very first reaction. Okay? All right, here we go. So here is the book. And, and notice your reaction to this. You can see that the cover is rather plain with a lot of empty space so that you can actually see yourself. That is how you think and feel about pleasure, which is one of the main purposes of this book. When you think of pleasure, what's the first word that pops into your mind? Many people, the very first response is sex. It's not too surprising because our culture is highly sexualized and that tends to be top of mind. But clearly, there's more to pleasure than just sexual experiences. And, uh, I've done this experiment with hundreds of people easily, and 3 out of 5 typically respond to sex as their very first thought. What's even more interesting is how people respond. Food was a close second. We don't normally talk about pleasure in public because it's somehow a little bit too close to home, a little too physical, a little too fleshy, uh, makes us feel a bit uncomfortable, exposed, even vulnerable. But why? Why is that? Curiously, we don't have any difficulty talking about happiness. There's all kinds of books, articles, sermons, songs, even college courses about pleasure. About happiness. But happiness researchers even go to great lengths to distance themselves from the taint of pleasure and would convince us that pleasure and happiness are two different things. Pleasure, we're told, is a sensory fleeting experience that soon passes and depends on external conditions. Happiness, in contrast, is more enduring. It's not something you can just buy like a new cell phone. You have to cultivate it, and it persists through the ups and downs of our daily life. Well, while this sounds good, like many of our assumptions about pleasure, it turns out to be false. The distinction between happiness and pleasure is a false dichotomy, which is something we'll return to a bit later. Or take the common belief that people who seek pleasure are weak, that they have some type of character flaw. Again, this is obviously false. Why? Because seeking pleasure is not a choice, moral or otherwise. We are biologically um, programmed, hardwired, as it were, to seek pleasure. So, as pleasure seeking organisms, every organism moves towards what promotes its existence and moves away from what threatens it. In simpler organisms, we refer to this as instinct. But in more complex organisms like ourselves, these instincts have evolved to become pleasure and pain, the two cardinal coordinates by which we navigate through life. So, as a pleasure seeking organism, it's critical that we get our cardinal coordinates straight. Our very life depends on it. But that's a big problem because we're so confused about pleasure, we don't even realize it. For instance, what would you say is the opposite of pain? Most people would say pleasure, right? As though pleasure and pain were like the two poles of a compass. It's true that we move towards pleasure and away from pain. So you may think that compass analogy is pretty accurate. But again, have you noticed that pleasure and pain often tend to come together in everything from a love hate intimate relationship to marathon runners staggering over the finish line exhausted and ecstatic. There are women, in fact, who experience childbirth as being one of the greatest, most pleasurable experiences of their lives, while many others experience it as the worst. So, what's going on here? It turns out that the pleasure analogy of a compass is just wrong. The opposite of pain and the opposite of pleasure are the very same thing. Now, imagine what would happen if your GPS app on your smartphone were just 5% off. Going across town, you might not notice much, but on a long journey, a 5% error, and you could end up in the wrong city because how we seek pleasure becomes habits, and habits become a lifestyle. And in medicine, lifestyle is destiny. And that's why getting our cardinal coordinates accurate is so incredibly important. In fact, there was a 2009 landmark study reported in the Archives of Internal Medicine that found 80% of the most common life threatening illnesses, diabetes, heart attack, stroke, even cancer, could be prevented with healthy lifestyle choices alone. So, why aren't we making those healthy choices? I would say it's because our internal GPS is out of whack, and in our pursuit of happiness and pleasure, we end up in pain and suffering. Multiply this situation by 7.5 billion people, and you get a species that is lost, wandering about on the edge of an evolutionary cliff. Here's another confusion. Do you know what it means to be an Epicurean? According to the dictionary, an Epicurean is a person devoted to sensual enjoyment, especially that of fine food and drink. The only problem is this definition turns out to be 180 degrees opposite of what Epicurus actually taught. It's true, he did recommend pursuing pleasure, but for him, pleasure was so spare and minimalist that in modern days we'd think of him as being an ascetic. In my book, Epicurus was the victim of a disinformation campaign, which continues to this day. Actually, he is one of the great unsung heroes of modern civilization. Did you know that Thomas Jefferson was a self-avowed Epicurean? And when Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, that famous paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He was probably considering whether to write life, liberty, and the pursuit of pleasure. That would give our declaration a little bit of a different feel, wouldn't it? As a student of Greek philosophy, he was well aware that Epicurus agreed with Aristotle, who famously claimed happiness is the meaning and purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. But Epicurus took the inquiry a step further and observed that pleasure is the beginning and the end of a completely happy life. As you can see, the debate about pleasure and happiness has been going on a long time. It's nothing new. But we're going to clear up this confusion right now, once and for all, with another experiment. Okay? The answer is right here on the cover. So take a look. You can see that. Mhm. The meaning of is in its sound, and even more importantly, in the feeling it evokes. So let's do this together. It will be more meaningful to you to have your own experience. I invite you to take a deep breath in and then breathe out. Say, ah. Good. Let's try it again. This time with a little more feeling. Big breath in and breathing out. Ah, you feel a sense of relief. Great, you're getting it. Now, one last time, but this time with your lips closed. Okay, so don't overthink it. Just try it. Take a big breath in, seal your lips, and breathe out. Hmm, how's that feel? This book takes a deep dive into that feeling. And what I can tell you is if you look into it deeply, you'll come to a profound mystery that leads to ecstasy, bliss, and equanimity. A good place to start is with a simple working definition of pleasure. Pleasure is anything that feels good. If it fills your body with delightful sensations, evokes warm feelings in your heart and positive thoughts in your mind, brings a smile to your lips, excites, amuses, or satisfies, lifts your spirits or inspires a sense of well being, meaning, and purpose, then it's a pleasure. Okay? This common sense definition reveals the true nature of pleasure, much like a glass prism reveals the true nature of light. Just as every image on your computer screen is made of three primary colors red, green, and blue. Every pleasure you experience is made of three primary experiences physical, emotional, and mental. What's very interesting and very important is when these three aspects of our experience the physical, emotional, and mental are well cultivated and brought into balance and aligned, they spontaneously lead to the fourth and highest level of pleasure, which is spiritual, or what I like to call asis. Just like red, green, and blue come together to form white. So um, think of pleasure as a prism with four levels. The first level at the base is physical, and and the base of this prism is broad because it's foundational. The second level is emotional. Happiness is simply pleasure experienced at an emotional level, as is love and joy and fun and play. At the mental level, we have the pleasures of thought that my life has meaning and purpose, that I have enough money in the bank. These are mental pleasures. And to get to the very top, to the highest pleasure, it's not a process of transcending the lower levels. It's really a process of descending, working our way down through the mental, emotional, and physical layers of our being and refining them. So, um, a lot of spiritual traditions, they talk about getting to the highest level by trying to negate or get rid of the body. This is quite the opposite. Because ultimately, every pleasurable experience, the way we know an experience is pleasurable, is because we feel it in our body. It is that ah feeling. So imagine if instead of fighting against our nature as pleasure seeking organisms, we embraced it wholeheartedly and studied it and calibrated it very finely and then allowed this deep natural intelligence to inform and guide us through life. That's what this book is about. Instead of living from a fear centric point of view, organized around avoiding pain, this is really living from a love centric point of view, pursuing the things we enjoy and doing the things we love. From an outside perspective, it may not really look that different in how we are behaving, but internally, to operate from a love centric point of view as opposed to a fear centric point of view is really like day and night. Now, it's easy to say this, not so easy to do it because, our uh, whole history of humankind has been steeped in fear. And even today, where we have tremendous conveniences and security, nonetheless, there still is plenty of fear to go around. Just read the nightly news. And in fact, the news is designed to continually stimulate fear. So, what I'm proposing in this book is simple, but not necessarily easy to do. And the selection is from chapter 17, titled Paradise Now. And Paradise Now, you may, if you Google this, was actually a very famous play put on by an avant garde theater group. And actually, I saw it performed in Boulder, Colorado at the university when I was a student. A personal truth. Meditation has long been my ground zero, a kind of benchmark from which I start my day. So shortly after my first daughter, Ashani, was born, who we called Bungie, I arranged with her mother some special father daughter time to meditate with her in the great hall upstairs. I devised a way to wrap a folded woolen poncho lengthwise about my waist and then around Bungie to keep her warm and snug against me, and place a small pillow on my lap for her head. Babies love to be swaddled, and this freed my hands. If she became restless, I would deepen my breath with a whispering sound, and she would drift back to sleep. We spent many a peaceful and intimate morning this way, and then the inevitable happened. While meditating in the luminous pre-dawn darkness, Bungie began to cry inconsolably. It was like an alarm bell going off, demanding something be done. But what? She had just been fed and diapered. All I could do was hold her close to me to comfort her. Such crying is often called colic, suggesting an intestinal origin, but no one really knows the cause. The usual advice is to put the colicky baby in their crib and shut the door so that the child can learn to soothe herself. This seems counterintuitive, if not cruel. In a primitive society, such abandonment would be unthinkable and dangerous. Before going on, I need to dispel a common misunderstanding about meditation. Although a meditator outwardly may appear to be like a stone Buddha detached from the world, inwardly, a lot is going on. Meditation is a way to directly experience the raw datum of one's moment to moment existence, free of habitual ego attachments and cultural biases. One withdraws from the distractions of the outer world to heighten the sensitivity of their inner world. The goal is not detachment, but rather non attachment, to be fully present without grasping or pushing away. The Indian sage Krishnamurti described it as a practice of choiceless awareness, a conscious return to the naked awareness of an innocent child. As I held Bungie close to me, her shrill cries cut through me like a serrated rasp. I felt overwhelmed with helplessness. When difficulties arise in meditation, the only thing to do is to breathe and surrender more deeply. My chest felt heavy, like being smothered from the inside. The stifling sensations grew more intense when suddenly an unspeakable sorrow erupted in my core. Bungie's plaintive cries awoke in me a forgotten longing for when I was a child lying in my mother's lap, at peace, wrapped in her scent and warmth. As we sat there, tears streaming down our cheeks, the door opened and Mommy began to slowly climb the creaking knotted pine steps. She was following her instincts as warm milk leaked from her taut, engorged breasts. She sat down next to us and began to weep. At that instant, Bungie and I stopped crying and bore silent witness to Mommy's tears of longing. That's when I realized my personal truth, that my mother had been the representative, living embodiment of the mother, Mother Nature. I realize that within each of us, at the heart of every spiritual pursuit, every relationship, every heartbreak, and every desire is the longing to return to Mother, the Source, the Absolute. We long to re experience life before words, before ideas, before self consciousness. We long to return to our original nature, to our original wholeness. This pull towards the Absolute is one of the most tender and profound forces in all of human life. It is the longing to return to the lost innocence of paradise and lay our head in Mother Nature's lap. Indeed, to return to the garden is our ultimate inescapable destiny, and every desire and pleasure is in some way a movement toward it.